What if everything we know about human origins is incomplete? It sounds strange at first, haha. But think about it for a moment. For a very long time, we believed that early humans lived in a constant state of movement, always searching, always chasing food, always trying to survive one more day. There was no stability, no long-term vision, no sense of building something that could last, just movement and survival. But then something changed. Thousands of years ago, in a region we now call the Middle East, a group of people made a decision that would quietly reshape human history. They stopped moving. Yes, they actually stopped. Instead of continuing the endless cycle of searching and wandering, they chose to stay. They stayed in one place. They began to observe their environment. They noticed patterns in the land, in the seasons, in the way plants grew and water flowed. And slowly, something new started to emerge. These people are known as the Natufians. They were not just another group passing through history. They were among the first to move toward a more settled way of life. They built simple structures. They formed early communities. They adapted to their surroundings in ways that went beyond basic survival. And this shift may have changed everything, because when humans stop moving, something powerful happens. They begin to think differently. They begin to plan. They begin to understand that survival is not just about reacting to the moment, but about preparing for what comes next. The Natufians started noticing which plants could be useful, where food could be found consistently, and how their environment could support them over time. This wasn't full agriculture yet, but it was the beginning of an idea, the idea that nature could be understood and eventually shaped. And that idea is what makes this moment in history so important. Because from this point forward, human life begins to transform. Slowly but permanently. From movement to stability. From instinct to awareness. From short-term survival to long-term thinking. Archaeological discoveries show that these early communities used tools, organized their living spaces, and interacted in ways that suggest structure and shared knowledge. They were not just surviving anymore. They were building something, not bad for people we once described as primitive. But what makes this even more fascinating is what science has discovered in recent years. When researchers studied ancient DNA from this region, they found deep connections between these early populations and later groups that lived in the same areas. This suggests that history is not a series of disconnected moments. It is a continuous story, one that builds over time, layer by layer, generation after generation. And the Natufians may represent one of the earliest chapters of that story. One that builds over time, layer by layer, generation after generation. And the Natufians may represent one of the earliest chapters of that story. Not the beginning of humanity, but the beginning of something closer to who we are today. Because when you look at modern life, at cities, societies, systems, it all traces back to a simple shift. A decision made thousands of years ago to stop moving, to observe, to understand. And maybe, just maybe, what we see today is not the beginning of our story, but the continuation of something far older than we ever imagined. And if we follow this idea further, something even more interesting appears. Because stability doesn't just change how people live, it changes how they think. It creates memory, tradition, and shared identity. The Natufians were no longer just individuals trying to survive. They became something more, a connected group. And from that connection, new behaviors began to form: cooperation, planning, and even early social structures. Which means this wasn't just a lifestyle change, it was the beginning of human society as we recognize it today. And this is where DNA changes everything, because when scientists analyzed ancient remains from this region, they didn't just find isolated individuals, they found patterns, connections that link ancient populations to later ones, which means the story didn't disappear, it continued through generations, through time. And that raises a powerful idea, that what we see today, may still carry echoes of those early people, not just in culture or behavior, but deep within human ancestry itself. And when you think about it, that idea changes everything because it means the past is not truly gone. It is still present in ways we rarely notice, in how societies form, in how humans adapt, and even in how we understand ourselves. The Natufians may not be widely known today, but their impact could be far greater than we imagine. Not as a forgotten group, but as a quiet foundation, a starting point for something that never really ended. And maybe the most surprising part is this: history is often told as a series of major events, big empires, famous names, dramatic changes, but the real turning points are sometimes much quieter. A small group choosing to stay, a simple shift in behavior, a new way of seeing the world, and from those quiet moments, entire civilizations can emerge, which makes you wonder, how many other forgotten moments shaped who we are today? And perhaps this is what makes the story truly powerful. It reminds us that human history is not built in a single moment. It is built slowly, through decisions that may seem small at the time, but carry consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. The Natufians didn't know they were shaping the future. They were simply adapting, responding to their world. Yet those responses created a path, one that others would follow, generation after generation. And if we look closely, we can still see the traces of that path today, in the way we build communities, in the way we share knowledge, in the way we search for meaning and stability. These are not new ideas. They are echoes of choices made long ago by people who chose to stay, to learn, and to adapt. And in doing so, they didn't just change their own lives, they helped shape the direction of human history itself. And maybe that's the most important thing to understand. We are not separate from that story. We are part of it. Every idea, every system, every structure we see today has roots that go deeper than we think. And when we look back at those early moments, we are not just studying the past, we are discovering the beginning of ourselves. A beginning that didn't end, but continued, quietly, through time. And this is where the story becomes personal, because understanding the past is not just about history. It is about identity, about seeing how deeply connected everything really is, from the earliest communities to the modern world we live in today. Nothing appeared suddenly. Everything evolved, step by step, choice by choice. And when you realize that, you begin to see human history in a completely different way. And maybe that new perspective is what truly matters, because it allows us to see beyond simple timelines, beyond isolated events. It reveals a deeper continuity, a connection that runs through time, linking past and present in ways we are only starting to understand. And as we continue to explore, to study, and to question, we get closer to something important. Not just the story of humanity, but the story of how we became who we are today. And perhaps the journey doesn't end here, because every discovery leads to new questions. Every answer opens another layer, and the deeper we look, the more we realize how much is still unknown. Human history is not a closed book. It is still being written, still unfolding. And somewhere within that unfolding story, there may be answers we have yet to imagine, answers that could change how we see ourselves forever. And maybe that's the real reason we keep searching, not just to understand the past, but to understand ourselves, to see where we come from and why we are the way we are. Because every layer we uncover brings us closer to that answer, closer to a truth that has been there all along, waiting to be seen, waiting to be understood. And perhaps we are only at the beginning of that discovery. And maybe that's the most important thing to remember. The story of humanity was never about a single moment. It was built, choice by choice, step by step. And somewhere in that long chain of decisions, a small group chose to stay. They observed, they learned, they adapted, and without even knowing it, they helped shape everything that came after. So the question is not just where we come from. The real question is, what are we continuing today?